Hi guys, it's Gracie. Welcome to my channel and my first YouTube video. So today I'm going to be talking about advice for college, mainly things that I wish I would have known going into my first year but had to learn throughout my first and second year in college. Before I jump into the video, I do just want to clarify that all of this advice is based on my limited experiences. It isn't meant to capture every experience or apply to every single person. I just think it's an interesting perspective essentially on pieces of advice I wish I had received or things I wish I would have known going into my first year of college. So with that, let's jump into the first piece of advice, which is about imposter syndrome. So if you're not familiar with imposter syndrome, it's essentially this idea that you are not good enough to be where you are, you're inadequate in some way, or maybe not as good as your peers. It's something that a lot of people struggle with, including myself. I continue to struggle with it, but it was a lot worse my first year, and it's really hard to break out of that habit. It's so tough to sometimes convince yourself essentially that you are worth it and you are adequate and things like that. So some advice I have for combating that is to generally just realize that admissions committees don't make mistakes. So if you did get into a school, you are good enough to be there. But another thing to think about, especially when you find yourself comparing yourself to your peers, is just thinking about the starting line, I guess you can call it, which is essentially just talking about the fact that you did not start out at the same place as a lot of your peers. So this could be anything from, somebody having an older sibling at the school to help them out, somebody having a parent who went to the school who can offer them advice. Maybe they went to a college prep school that really prepared them for 4 years for this experience, whereas you didn't have that sort of opportunity. So just recognizing that you are coming in with a different level of experience and a different starting point than your peers, and just taking it easy on yourself and recognizing that. The next piece of advice is about the first week of college, which I totally did not have this advice going in. My first week of college is called Camp Yale. So essentially, it's the first week of school before classes actually start, when there are just a bunch of events going on. Mostly geared towards first years, so they're doing pre-registration and things like that. But most upperclassmen are also on campus too. But especially for first years, this is a time when they're making so many of their friends. They're establishing their social support system and things like that in that first week. So if you're not putting yourself out there in those situations where you could make friends, it can be a lot harder to then go and make friends later on in the school year, which is something that I ran into. My first week especially, but the entire first semester for me was really tough. I was very homesick and just not adjusting well. So I didn't put myself out there that first week. I literally just stayed in my room, and it really hurt me throughout the rest of the semester when I felt like I didn't have that opportunity to make friends. So my advice is, no matter how hard it is or how much you're struggling, just put yourself out there in those situations. Just force yourself to do it, and you will thank yourself later on. That being said, I do just want to give a follow-up piece of advice, which is that these friendships are ones that you're making when you're in a very particular headspace, which is generally that I'm here for the first time all alone and I don't have any friends. I need to make friends as soon as possible, which is totally understandable, and I think everybody goes through it. But what that means is these people you've made friends with aren't necessarily meant to be your best friends throughout college. They may very well end up being those people for you, but likely one or two or more of those friends are going to be people who you aren't actually that compatible with. So it's important to just let those friendships go when the time comes and to continue making friends. Keep yourself open to those opportunities, and then let the friendships you made first year sort of naturally fade, and just have it in your head that that's probably going to happen, especially sophomore year. You're just going to start to get a sense more of what those more lasting friendships are going to look like, and that's okay. So next, this sort of goes in again with the stress of first year and feeling like you're the only one who's struggling. Okay, so there's sort of an expectation, I feel, at school to act like everything's okay, like you're doing so well, you're not homesick, you don't find school difficult, things like that. There's a phrase that people always use, like they say they're thriving or whatever. It's not usually true. Like maybe you are really having a great time, but that doesn't mean you're not struggling with something. And I think the fact that people don't talk about that makes other people feel like their struggles are maybe really out of the ordinary, like they're all alone, like they're doing something wrong because they're not having this perfect college experience. But nobody's having a perfect college experience. Everybody is struggling with something. If you're not homesick, then maybe you're finding school really difficult. If you aren't homesick and you're not finding school difficult, maybe, I don't know, like you're having trouble making friends. It could be any number of things, but everybody's struggling with something, so don't feel like you're alone with it, even if it seems that way. And people aren't necessarily doing this to be ingenuine. It's just like really difficult for people to be vulnerable and to admit that they're struggling with things. It's just not a natural thing for people to reveal, I guess. So my advice there would be to be that person that can be vulnerable, to put yourself out there and share what you're struggling with, because not only will it make yourself feel better when other people admit like, oh my gosh, I'm going through the same thing, but you could make such a big difference for somebody else who's also struggling but doesn't maybe have the courage to say it. Like just hearing you admit that you're struggling could make the biggest difference for them. This is one thing that I actually do feel like I did well with my first year, was just being vulnerable and being very willing to open up to people that I was having a hard time. If I hadn't done that, I would have felt so alone. But fortunately, I did come to realize pretty quickly that everybody was struggling with something. Next, if you're somebody that is struggling with homesickness or probably will struggle with homesickness like I did, try to set goals for yourself about like how often you will go home. Because if you go in with the mentality like I'm just going to go home whenever I'm homesick, you're going to be home every weekend or as often as you can be home. You're not going to be on campus those like crucial times for making friends, and your adjustment period to college is just going to be extended over and over and over again as long as you continue doing that. So I would say just set a goal for yourself, especially like your first few weeks or months. Essentially just like, I won't go home for the first 2 months or the first 3 weeks or something like that, whatever a reasonable goal is for you. For me, I didn't go home at all first semester, not because I didn't want to, but because I honestly couldn't. Like, for me, it's a 17-hour drive home or like a whole day of flying, so it just wasn't like feasible for me to go home. But I'm actually really thankful for it now, because even though the first semester of school, I'm not gonna lie, was awful for me, it really forced me to adapt and like adjust to college life, and I was so much happier second semester even. And then like during my whole sophomore year, I was like not homesick at all, totally well adjusted and just really happy. So try to set that goal for yourself. Next, I think it's just like get out of your comfort zone. College is a great time to try new things that you maybe would have been too scared to do before, whether that's extracurricular activities or, you know, some class or area of study. Even just like socially putting yourself out there can be a really difficult thing to do in high school, so college is a great time to try that. I do just want to caution, like, this doesn't mean putting yourself in situations you're uncomfortable with, especially socially. You know, maybe you're going in really nervous about drinking culture or hookup culture or something like that. I'm not saying like to pressure yourself to try those things, but things that you want to try but you're scared to, college is a great time to do that. And I think you're really like missing out if you don't push yourself to try new things. My next piece of advice is to build relationships with faculty. So this is something I struggle with a lot just because going to office hours makes me so nervous. I literally freak out before office hours. Like, I try to rehearse things to say, and like that sounds bad, and it probably is because professors can probably tell, but I just want my professors to like think highly of me and think I'm intelligent and things like that. So yeah, this one's so hard for me, but it's also so important because professors can offer Such great advice. You'll need them later on to write letters of recommendation. So developing those relationships is so important, but also really difficult. So one strategy I think is helpful in achieving that is to set a goal for yourself. So for me, this goal, which I didn't start setting until sophomore year, was develop a relationship with one professor each semester, so that by the end you'll have 8 professors you can really rely on and go to for advice, letters of recommendation, whatever it may be, and you don't necessarily feel overwhelmed. Even if you're uncomfortable, go to office hours, get to know your professors. 9 times out of 10 it's a really great experience, so push yourself to do that. The next piece of advice is maybe a little like general and even cliche, but it's just to work really hard to find a balance that works for you, which it can be super hard to do because, first of all, college is probably the first time for a lot of people when you have so much freedom with your time. Yes, you have class, but you can choose whether or not to go to class. You can choose how much time to put into your classes. There's a lot more time for like socializing. You have to set aside time for yourself. You're in charge of like your sleep schedule, things like that. So it's just like a lot of responsibility, and it can be hard to find a balance and not go really heavily towards one particular area of your life. So for me, the part that I struggled with was not putting 100% of my time and energy into school. That's something I did, honestly, definitely first semester, if not my entire first year. I was so focused on school that I did not give any attention to other aspects of my life, like my social life or even just like mental and physical and emotional health. Like I just neglected those parts of my life to do well in school. And I did do really well in school, but I wasn't happy at all. So try not to do that. That also doesn't just apply to, people who put everything into school. There are also people who get into college and there are so many opportunities for socializing that they tend to maybe neglect school and just get caught up in like the social life. Other people maybe balance those things pretty well but don't get enough sleep or exercise or eat well or give time to themselves, things like that. So work really hard to maintain that balance and understand that no one area of your life can come before everything else all the time. Okay, so make sure you are getting 8 hours of sleep, which is possible in college no matter what anybody tells you. You just have to manage your time to be able to achieve that. Work hard in school, but give yourself time to go out with your friends. Know when you need a day to stay in instead of going out to a party or something and you just need to stay in and like do a face mask and watch Netflix or whatever. Make sure you work really hard to achieve that balance or you are not making the most of your 4 years and you probably are also being pretty unhealthy. Okay, so that was sort of a heavy one, but the last one is actually really fun and I think exciting and something that I'm so thankful for, which is just college is a brand new start essentially. Most of the time you're going to be going somewhere where nobody knows you, so it's really an opportunity for you to sort of reinvent yourself if you want to, and that doesn't mean like changing yourself and being ingenuine or whatever, but if you've always wanted to change yourself in a certain way but are afraid of like what people would think or say, this is a great time to do it because nobody knows you any other way. So for me, I was vegetarian all of high school. I wanted to become vegan, but I didn't want to deal with like what people would say since I already got enough comments about being vegetarian. So I just made the switch like my first day of college. I was like, okay, I'm vegan. And then that's how everybody knew me. So like nobody ever really said anything because that's just who I was to them from the start. So it's a really good opportunity to make changes like that. Maybe it's dyeing your hair or cutting it or like even like the smallest things like that or something bigger, but just recognize the opportunity. Consider things that you may want to change or have always wanted to change but maybe been scared, and take that opportunity. So that was my last piece of advice for this video. If I missed anything that you really want to know, please leave a comment down below and I'll make sure to answer it. Otherwise, that's all for my first video. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next week.